Hey guys, welcome to another math video. For this one, I'll be talking about parallel lines and transversals. Okay, so we got a lot to cover in this video. Lots of stuff to cover. But they're all a part of this stuff, so we gotta go through all of them. Alright? Okay, so first we'll go over parallel lines, and basically parallel lines are lines that don't intersect, and they go in the same direction indefinitely. A good example of this is the double yellow line you see in the middle of the road. They're parallel because they don't intersect, and they go on indefinitely. Well, they stop at some point, but in a perfect world, they will go on indefinitely. Okay, now transversal. Transversal is a line that intersects other lines, and they don't have to intersect perpendicularly. They can intersect at like an angle, but the point is they intersect other lines. Okay, so this is basically what we're talking about here. It's a combination of the two, parallel lines with the transversal. So you have to make sure that you define your parallel lines. So in this case, lines A and B are parallel to each other, and line T is the transversal. So the transversal cuts into these two parallel lines and creates angles. 4 angles for each line. So we'll go over each of the different types of angles that you find here. Okay, so first angle type we have is the alternate exterior angles. So when we're talking about parallel lines with transversals, there's an interior and an exterior. So the exterior is going to be the stuff on the outside. So looking at the point of view from the parallel lines, this area right here is in between the lines, which makes this area the interior. This side here isn't coned off on one side, which makes it the exterior, as does this side. Okay, so the same colored arrows show you which angles are congruent or the same measure. Okay, so angles in this picture, angles 1 and 8 have the same measure, and angles 2 and 7 have the same measure. They're also congruent angles, meaning that they're the same size or same measure. Okay, so next we got alternate interior angles. So now we're talking about angles on the inside. Okay, so you can see from the colored arrows, angles 3 and 6 are congruent, angles 4 and 5 are congruent. So the word alternate in this case just means opposite side of the transversal. Okay, so moving on. Next up, we got corresponding angles. So corresponding angles basically are angles that lay in the same position. So if we cut this in half, about the middle here, so that we see these 4 angles separately from these 4 angles, you'll notice that the same colored arrows point to congruent angles again. So taking a look at just this group here, angle 1 is in the top left. Looking at this group, angle 5 is in the top left. So that makes them corresponding angles. They lie in the same position. So angle 3, for example, is in the bottom left. Angle 7 is also in the bottom left. They are corresponding angles. Okay. Next up, we have vertical angles. So vertical angles are angles that are across from each other, as you can tell from the same colored arrows. Okay, so these 2 angles here, these 2 angles here, same for this side here. Okay, and last but not least, we got consecutive interior angles. So consecutive interior angles are not congruent to each other, as you can see from the different colored arrows I have. Consecutive interior angles, so consecutive in this case means on the same side of the transversal. Okay, so consecutive interior angles are supplementary. And if you need a refresher on supplementary angles, go check out my other video on complementary and supplementary angles. Alright, so let's take a look at an example. So find the measure of all the angles if the measure of angle 1 is 42 degrees. So angle 1 and angle 4 are congruent because they're vertical angles. Angle 1 and angle 5 are congruent because they are corresponding angles. You could also say angles 4 and 5 are congruent because they're alternate interior angles. And angle 1 and angle 8 are congruent because they're alternate exterior angles, or you could say angle 5 and angle 8 are congruent because they're vertical angles, or you could say angle 4 and angle 8 are congruent because they are corresponding angles. In any rate, angles 1, 4, 5, and 8 are all congruent, which means they're all 42 degrees. So in that case, now we can find angle 2, and since angles 2 and 3 are congruent because they're vertical angles, 3 and 6 are congruent because they are alternate interior angles, 6 and 7 are congruent because they're vertical angles. So if I find the measurement of angle 2, I'll also find the measurements of angle 3, 6, and 7. Okay, so if we look at angles 1 and 2, they're supplementary angles. So if I subtract 42 degrees from 180 degrees, I'll get angle 2. So angle 2 should be 138 degrees, which means angle 3, angle 6, and angle 7 will be the same measurement as angle 2, 138 degrees. So you see how quickly we did that one, huh? Okay, so let's try this one here. So we're going to find the measure of all the angles if the measurement of angle 1 is 4x minus 30 and angle 7 is 2x plus 12. Okay, so they're on opposite sides here, but we know that angle 1 and angle 5 are corresponding angles. We also know angle 7 and angle 3 are corresponding angles. So if we use any of these two pairs here, we know that they're supplementary angles. So if we added these two together, they should add up to 180 degrees. So from this we can solve for x. Okay, so now that we know what x is, we can find the measure of angle 1. And once we do that, we'll know also angle 4, angle 5, and angle 8. Okay, so let's see what angle 1 is. Okay, so angle 1 is 102 degrees. Okay, now there's two ways we can find the other angles. We can either substitute into here, or because we know that angle 1 and angle 7 are supplementary angles, we can just subtract this from 180 degrees, which is the shorter way to do. Okay, so we know angle 7 is 78 degrees, which is also the measure for angle 6, angle 3, and angle 2. Alright guys, so that's pretty much it on parallel lines and their transversals. If you need to go back and look at the examples, because I know I moved through them pretty quick, just go ahead and rewind and review whatever you need to review. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in.